Thanks, Sukhi, and thanks Khaki Lab for inviting me for this talk. And most important, thanks all of you who have made the time to log in. And I want to thank another entity, Sony TV, because I know a large number of you have joined in because you have a curiosity about Ahilyabai, which was raised by Sony TV serial on Ahilyabai. Many years ago, Mr. M.N. Deshpande, the former Director General of Archaeology, while discussing Mughal-e-Azam, said to me, Mughal-e-Azam has been a curse as well as a boon to Indian history. Why boon? Because it brought back Akbar and Salim, the very interesting characters, to our mindscape. And why a curse? Because now people take everything in Mughal-e-Azam as gospel truth. Try telling someone that, hey, Anarkali, if you try to tell someone that Anarkali was not a fact, there's no historical truth to the story, and it was just a fiction that was cooked up by someone in late 19th century, nobody will believe you. Same is the case for Ahilyabai, the mother of Malwa. But before since most of you have some idea of Ahilyabai, before I move ahead, I would like to situate you in Malwa. This red triangle that you see is Malwa. It's a fertile plateau between the Vindhya ranges and the ranges. And now, of course, it's pretty hot, but not very long ago, there was a Urdu saying, which was very apt, which said, Subh Banaras, Shame Awadh, and Shabe Malwa, because Malwa evenings, nights were always cool. And as you can see, because you have here these things between the two, if you wanted to come from the Ganges to Gujarat, which was a very attractive place due to its trade, the only way you could, easy way out was through Malwa. And because of that, Malwa and especially towns like Vidisha and Ujjain have always been important for Indian history. However, as luck would have it, since since Shah Jahan's time, after Burhanpur became important, Malwa somehow lost its prominence. And the wars that happened after Aurangzeb's death, from around say 1700 to 1740s, were devastating for Malwa, because of which we was fairly depopulated. So when Ahilyabai came to power, this is what happened. But before I go further, I just want to clarify and highlight a few historical untruths. What are they? Let's have a look. So I've heard people referring to Malwa Holkar as a Maharaja. He was never a Maharaja. He was the Subedar of Maratha Empire, which means he was in charge for everything of the Maratha Empire to the north of Chandwad. And he was very proud of it, but he was not a Maharaja. And neither was there a Holkar Samrajya. I've heard people throwing word Samrajya left, right, and center without understanding it. Samrajya means an empire. Holkars did not have an empire. Holkars were Jagirdar till about 1818, till about 1800. And then after the fall of Bajirao II and the Maratha Peshwas in the Maratha Empire, Holkar became independent, and Yashwantrao Holkar did style himself as a Maharaja, but that was for a short time. After their defeat in 1818, they once again became feudatories of the British. So there was not a Holkar Samaraj. Third, Ahilyabai was not a Maharani. She was never a queen. She was never a Rajmata. She headed her own Jagir, which was part of the Maratha Empire. And she was very happy with it. And she always, always paid her respects to the Peshwa. So, another. If you see the serial, it is full of glitz and bling. But Malhara Holkar and his family were very careful. Not that they did not have money, but since they came from very difficult backgrounds, they were very, very careful with their money. I actually laughed when I saw some accounts written in one of the books of Gautamabai's time, which Gautamabai, who was Ahilyabai's mother-in-law, she carefully noted down the amount she got for selling the extra ghee and the salt she had in her pantry. So you can imagine these people are not going to waste that money on bling. Okay. Some more things. Everything that you see in the serial up to her widowhood is fiction. There's nothing. Remember, Malhara was not a very big Sardar for people to make a note of where his son was married or how his daughter-in-law was. And nobody knew that Ahilyabai was going to become so important and so prominent. So nobody really mentioned when she got married, how the marriage was finalized. Everything about how they met her, how the Peshwa, everything is pure fiction. I've been asked by many people, could she read? Did she start educational institutes? Yes, she did not start educational institutes. We do not know if she could read. And remember, those times they had a number of clerks reading out things to them. Even my dad, who was a senior officer, had many of the letters and correspondence read out to them, and he used to dictate his replies. He never sat down and typed out his own letters. So why would Ahilyabai do that? Some months ago, I got a WhatsApp message telling me that Ahilyabai was this great lady who fought great battles. No, she did not. I'm not even sure she actually sat on a horse ever, because we always read about her going in a palanquin. And I don't think she ever held any arms in her hands, weapons in her hands. By the way, for a woman to be great, she doesn't really have to be a warrior. She can and has done many other things. And the worst, I don't know if you have come across this myth, but this was a prevailing myth when I was a child, and many people keep telling you this. And there are some YouTube videos making up some gory stories about how Ahilyabai ordered her son's death for a misdemeanor. I will be discussing what happened a little later, but he was probably schizophrenic, and his death was caused by his illness. Okay, maybe I'll tell you now. What happened was, after he became in charge of the Holkar Jagirs, post Malhara's death, he probably had an attack of his schizophrenia and started suspecting a Brahmin of having illicit affairs with a lady from Ahilyabai's entourage. And one way or the other, he caused that Brahmin's death. After the Brahmin's death, it was proven that he was innocent. And this guilt put Malla Rao over the edge. Male Rao over the edge. Male Rao was the son. And what that meant was he felt he was being haunted and cursed by the Brahmin. And there are records saying that he was unable to sleep and was forever screaming and begging the Brahmin's ghost to let him go. Ahilyabai tried everything she could, but unfortunately couldn't avert his death. Okay, so why was Ahilyabai revered as a mother if she was just a Jagirdar? There's a story behind it. And for that, we have to go back a little to the beginning of Malla Rao's rise and his astute estate planning, something that many of our senior businessmen still don't do. When the Peshwas, when Bajirao Peshwa first started giving him Jagirs, he requested that part of the Jagir be the Saranjami Jagir, which was meant for maintaining a certain number of troops, and part be given to his wife as a Khasgi Jagir. Now that was very clever because Saranjami Jagirs never could be revoked by the ruler or the prime minister at will, the person who gave it. And unlike that, the Khasgi Jagirs was never revoked. It went from the person who got it to his or her descendants. So slowly, there was a fairly big chunk of the Holkar domains as Khasgi Jagirs, which, as I just mentioned, first given to Gautamabai, and after her death, passed on to her daughter-in-law, Ahilyabai. What had happened was, between as long as Male Rao was alive, there was no problem because Ahilyabai was the regent and she was also looking after both the Khasgi and the Saranjami Jagirs. But things became complicated when Male Rao died. He didn't have a son. No heir was a major problem in medieval society. So the duo, Gangadhar Chandrachud, who was the Holkar Diwan or prime minister, conspired with the Peshwa's uncle, Raghava, to get his hands on the Peshwa treasury. And how could they do that? They decided to try and force Ahilyabai to adopt a child of their choice, which would mean that she would be set aside later and they would look after everything, including her own Khasgi Jagir. They expected Ahilyabai, who was grief-stricken, to give in meekly. But unexpectedly, she refused. She resisted. She raised awareness and she got support through correspondence from other Maratha Sardars, and also went on to write to the Peshwa Madhavrao's own wife. Under all that moral pressure, Madhavrao Peshwa succumbed. He warned off the duo and confirmed Ahilyabai's right to adopt or not adopt, and to then administer her own Khasgi Jagirs. At the same time, on her say-so, he appointed Tukoji Rao, a distant cousin of Malla Rao, to head the Holkar armies and the Saranjami Jagir, with the tacit understanding that Tukoji Rao will remain loyal to Ahilyabai all his life. It is, yes, there was some friction later on, but generally, Tukoji Rao and Ahilyabai stuck to the agreement, and Ahilyabai not only looked after her own Khazgi Jagirs, she also administered the Holkar Saranjami Jagirs, which were north of Nasik, because Tukoji Rao most of the time was stationed in the Deccan, especially at Sandwad near Nasik. Once that was done, this is what Ahilyabai did. She knew money could be a temptation. So the first thing what she does, she goes and donates all the Jagir to Shiva, her deity, patron deity, and then ruled only as his agent. If you see this picture, this is the picture of her self-commissioned image, which I discovered at the Manakarnika Ghat, which she built in Varanasi. She always was praying to her. She shows herself that she's always bowing to him and only following his orders and working as his deputy to ensure the good of the people. After Ahilyabai, the Khazgi Jagirs were passed on and inherited by the other chief Holkar women. And generally, the idea of using all that money for the good of the people was stuck to. And how do I know? Because my family is the beneficiary of one such programs. Chandravati Masa, the grandmother of the current scion of Holkar family, Richard Holkar, in early 1920s, started a network of girls' schools in the Indore state, and trained single mothers and destitute women to become their teachers. My grandmother was one of them. In the 1960s, all the Khazgi properties were transferred by Yashwantrao Holkar, Richard Holkar's father, to a Khazgi trust, to a trust which is called Khazgi Devi Ahilyabai Trust, to ensure that the money stayed separate from other funds and Ahilyabai's legacy continued. So when she started ruling, the first thing that she decided thought that I really need to do something about the economy and about the people. So how do you increase the economy, improve the economy? First, because it's a rural farming community, and if everything there wasn't a huge big industries, there weren't industries, so he started. And as I told you, it was depopulated. So she invited agriculturists from Gujarat by offering free land and tax relief for a number of years. Okay, this is something that comes down, that I have discovered more through oral history. Because around Maheshwar, there are many, many villages where the villagers, if you go and talk to them about the history and the experience, they show you the roots and tell you how their ancestors were invited by Masa and who came down and settled there. What else did she? This is important. She encouraged sowing of cash crops like cotton and opium. Unlike most medieval rulers, Ahilyabai seems to be acutely aware of the importance of trade for the economy and society. The opium sounds dangerous, but remember at that time, Opium was mostly used for medicinal purposes and was in great demand. Even today, around Mandsaur and large parts of tracts of Malwa, opium is grown. Opium had become indigenous to Malwa a long time ago. And it is said that Jahangir acquired the habit of opium smoking in Malwa at Mando. So it was that common. So she just continued with what was there and tried to increase it. And how do we know that? There are parliamentary records of the British Parliament from 1802 and 1803, where they're complaining about opium trade from an opium grown in Malwa, which was mellower than the Indo-Gangetic Dua, cutting into their profits. And I suspect the conflict between the British and Yashwantrao was mainly Yashwantrao Holkar in 1790s to 1880s was mainly because the British wanted to control the Malwa opium. There are other records too. Before that, for the parliamentarians, they seem to be aware that opium is cutting into. If they're complaining at 1803, things must be happening from 1780s, which is bang in the middle of Ahilyabai's time. And yes, though Malwa, part of Malwa was also ruled under the Scindias, at that time, Mahadaji Scindia was too busy with affairs of the Doab to really focus on what was happening and what was being grown in Malwa. So it has to be Ahilyabai. And what else did she do? Improve farm productivity, by constructing irrigation tanks and dams. We'll look at some of them later. When farmers complained that it's too hot for us to go out and till the land in summer months, she employed water carriers to ferry drinking water to them in their fields and told them, now that you have it, go ahead, don't stop working. And she set aside government fields to ensure that birds would be diverted and get their feed there because they were not, those crops were not cut, and leave the farm produce unmolested. As I said, she was keen about trade. And so whether it is farm or it's trade, it needs money, it needs capital. And that can only be offered by bankers and traders. So after she invited brought the agriculturists in, she also invited bankers and traders from nearby Ujjain, Surat, and Burhanpur, and gave them special concessions and other things to settle in Malwa to do their business. Once they came, they brought their money and trade got a fillip. So they started trading, and stuff that was going from Surat to down south and other places went from Malwa to Surat to other places. So Malwa got a lot of money. Also, we just spoke about opium, and these traders carried this opium from Malwa, and Malwa agriculturists and traders got money. And because of that, Ahilyabai's treasury got money. Can you believe it? Without adding taxes, without adding to territorial gains, she managed to increase her revenue during the 30-year reign by 130%. Totally unheard of at that time. Everybody just taxed and taxed and taxed the poor people. As I said, absolute miracle. No wonder people looked at her as a mother. She gives them land, she gives us less taxes, she does she arranges for credit, she arranges for water, everything. And on top of that, her darbar was always open to her subjects to come to her with grievances. What the photograph you see here is a diorama that the Holkars have set up in Ahilyabai, exactly the place where Ahilyabai had her own darbar. In the verandas around sat her scribes and clerks, and people took full benefit of the offer. We have many different stories of this. There were a couple of childless widows who approached her. What had happened was their husbands had suddenly died, and they were widows of rich traders, and they wanted to adopt sons. But the local kamavisdar, sort of a collector, got greedy. He tried to they were offered either to not have any adoption, so that when they died, the money reverted to the kamavisdar, or give a very large grant, which made their living impossible. When Ahilyabai heard that, she was horrified. She told the kamavisdar in no certain terms that no such thing is going to happen, and she permitted those widows to adopt whoever they wanted, and said, don't pay any money to the treasury. The grateful widows built ghats at Khargon in the local Kunda River, which still exists, telling the story of Ahilyabai. In another story, when Ahilyabai was in Indore for the consecration of the Chhatris she built as memorials to her father-in-law, her husband, her son, and she was totally grief-stricken. But the population of Indore came to her and complained about the kamavisdar there. So what does Ahilyabai do? She doesn't drive the people away. She sets the grief aside and summarily removes the kamavisdar. So the next person knew that he could do no such thing. Then the bheels of Malwa, remember the hill tracks around? So the travelers and traders came to her and said, excuse us, but it's difficult to do business here because the bheels, there's no guarantee when they will attack us, when they will take away our stuff. Any other ruler would have immediately sent an army. But she decided to find out why this is happening. She called over the head of the bheels and discussed with him. And on finding that they had a very poor land and they couldn't farm and they didn't know how to farm, so she entered into an agreement with them. And what was the agreement? That these bills will now protect the travelers and the traders, and in return, they will get a small amount of money per headload of stuff carrying, or per pilgrim and traveler, or per bullock cart load. John Malcolm, in his Memoirs of Central India, by the way, John Malcolm was the Governor General of Central India, who took over from the Holkars when they were defeated. He writes in his memoirs that he hadn't realized how difficult dealing with the bheels would have been. So even though he sent his sepoys and sent his army around, they were not defeated, they were just hiding away. Till one day he did what Ahilyabai did. He called them to the negotiating table, asked them, why are you doing this? I hear you were not doing this before. And they said, well, you give us back what Masab had given us, and we won't trouble your people. By negotiating with the bills, she had not only ensured the safety of her people, she had also given them a livelihood. I wish many of our modern governments think about such matters. She was always worried about women. So she built lots of wells, ghats, and tanks. Now, the importance of a ghat does not dawn upon us urbanites who can get water by just opening taps. Can you imagine? Look at this river in Spate on the right side of your screen. Can you imagine trying to get down the slippery, muddy banks to collect some water from that river? It would be very dangerous. And it would equally be dangerous in dry weather, because then the water would be very low and the banks are very steep. But by building stone ghats, it would become easier for these women to approach water. Water, the precious commodity, which is really life. And even today, look at the picture on the left. That's a very recent picture. Even today, many of our women from rural communities walk kilometers to carry water back to their homes for cooking and stuff. For them, wells are a boon. And her wells made her absolutely immortal. Since Ahilyabai came to power and started building this in the last 250 years, God knows how many thousands of women have benefited from her programs. I would call her a Masa, because that is what you have to do in Malwa. If you ever try to say Ahilyabai Holkar without saying Ahilya Masa or Masa, you will be frowned upon, if not ostracized. Don't dare do that there. So this is where all this kept happening. She kept planning, she kept doing things. Now, imagine how much gratitude people of Nemar and Malwa have towards Ahilyabai. They not only call her Masa, there's a tradition to take her effigy around, image around Maheshwar Fort once a month to show her all is well. And they claim that this ensures that she rests in peace. By the way, I forgot something that I wanted to tell you. Sorry. You see this darbar? The white coverings and the stuff there are always still donated by the people. What happens is, whenever, I have witnessed this myself when I was in Maheshwar. Whenever there's a marriage or a sacred thread ceremony or any other important ceremony, important event in the home, the locals visit this. And first they visit a temple, and after inviting the gods for that event, they come and visit Masa and invite her and take her blessings. If they are in any difficulties and any troubles, they come to her darbar and ask for succor, ask her to help them. And when they get what they wanted, they donate these as a thank you to her. I don't know of any other ruler who is still invited for weddings. Imagine that. And as you can see in this, the locals, the children are joyfully participating. It is not something, there are many I took the first thing of the procession. There are many more. And this happens every month. And once a year, her image is paraded all around Maheshwar town. Again, to show her how prosperous they are, to thank her, and to assure her that they are not in difficulties. So I said, Ahilyabai built a lot of things, but how did she build it? Did she just get up in the morning one day and say, okay, I'm going to build something here? No, there was a complete system there. First, people, they were always asking her for help. They were always coming to her. They also wrote to her. They wrote to her of temples which were dilapidated. They wrote to her of the need for tanks, wells. And based on how important she, after inquiry, she decided how necessary the structure was, she took that decision. Then she appointed architects and design work and prepared plans. And when the design work was going on, I, by the way, have worked a lot on the plans and her architecture. And I started out expecting a certain kind of a style that you can say, okay, this is Ahilyabai style. To my surprise, there was no such thing. Each new structure was a cocktail that she put together of various things that caught her fancy. It's amazing. I'll show you, talk about that and show you examples later. Then she appointed a project manager. Then the project manager can't just go and do something. He needs funds. How do you do the funds? You transfer the funds through traders or bankers through hundis, exactly the way we do today. In fact, a little aside, India had a system of hundis and funds transfers going back 2,500 years when the West didn't even know, had any idea about it. She kept close control over the entire process of construction. So once, this is something that should have come later here. She wrote to the, immediately after taking the decision where to build, she wrote to the local rulers asking for permission to buy land and build there. Do you know what usually happened? She not only got the permission, but the rurals were so happy that she was building, because she didn't build only in her domain. She built across pan-India. They were so happy that she was building that most of the times they donated land and also gave endowments to the proposed structure. And then there was a consecration. Now, even during the construction phase, she was in constant correspondence, asking them, what's your problem? What's happening? Where are you getting the raw material from? How many people are you employing? In one particular thing that I found amazing, she wrote back to her project manager, Munshi, at Jezuri. She was building a huge tank there, which still exists. And when he wrote to her that part of it was destroyed because of flash floods, she gave them suggestions saying, okay, this is not going to work. This is what you should do. This has worked for me somewhere else. And even with consecration, sometimes, as happened with the Banaras temple, Banaras at that time, and even now, I guess, was absolutely infamous for the way the priests there were looting the travelers and creating havoc. And because they probably thought that this new temple that she was building would eat into their current income stream, they were creating some hassles. So she wrote to Warren Hastings, the Governor General of the East India Company in Calcutta, asking him to order his people to do what? To stop any problems and from happening and creating havoc at the consecration. And another thing, if you bother to walk around the lanes of Vishwanath, you will come across a little Nagar Khana, sort of a gate near the old main entrance of Vishwanath temple. And why that's important? It's because it has an inscription saying that Warren Hastings donated that gateway and Nagar Khana. So her stature had become such that not only were people all around calling her mother, but because of her pious nature and her moral stature, even the East India Company people were not agreeing to her requests and donating stuff for her. Imagine that. So where did Ahilyabai build? When I started out working on Ahilyabai about a decade ago, I couldn't find even a single list of her structures. And it took me, and I have been adding to this list all along. Every time I visit some place, I find something else new. So at last count, she built in 107 places. 107, sitting where? Somewhere here in the middle of nowhere. I strongly believe that her management style should be a case study for our management students as to how to go beyond the difficulties that our paucity of resources and distances create. So now let us move on to see what did she build. She built a number of things, but what I would like to do is start with the chhatris, because that was a concept that she introduced to Maratha architecture. Before she started building chhatris, Marathas only built samadhis. There was no chhatri. There is no chhatri for Shivaji. There is no chhatri for Bajirao I. There is no chhatri for Nana Sahib Peshwe. We only and only have samadhis. It appears Ahilyabai saw chhatris in Rajputana when she traveled with her husband and her father-in-law. And that brings me something else also I wanted to say, but probably missed. There's a story, all stories about how she was, her father-in-law dissuaded her from committing sati on the funeral pyre of her husband are fiction. There's every chance that Mallarao, I'm not sure if Ahilyabai was with Khanderao at Kumbheri, but Mallarao definitely wasn't. Because we have letters of Mallarao instructing and contacting Gangava Chandrachud and about behavior of Khanderao in the Mughal court. So the chances of being there, and this whole idea that every single widow committed suicide is also all wrong. And definitely wasn't the case with a family tradition with the Holkars. Mallara Holkar's own mother did not commit sati. In fact, this widow spirited young Mallara, who was almost a toddler, from their ancestral place to her brother's place to save his life. Even one of Mallara's own wives, Harkubai, did not commit sati. She remained a close confidant of Ahilyabai all her life and outlived Ahilyabai another 10 years. So And then there's also a study which shows that many Maratha women with young children committed sati after the children grew up. So you didn't have to die the minute your husband died. You could complete your duties and then choose to let go of your life. So these are all myths that are being built up, and we need to be sure that they're myths and we don't follow them. While talking about this, I want to say, talking about satis, I also want to say something else. Ahilyabai, who did not commit sati herself, we also have stories of how she stopped her daughter, Muktabai Phanse, whose name you find here, from committing sati. She dissuaded her, she wept, she tried to insist it, but couldn't stop. But we have no such mentions or records of her trying to stop her daughters-in-law. Her son Malera had 2 wives, or her granddaughters-in-law. You see, we have records about the deaths of these gentlemen and their wives committing sati. So if she had stopped, that would have been mentioned the way her attempts at stopping Muktabai are described. That I find very interesting. Okay, let's go back to, this was the first major structure that Ahilyabai built after she took over. This is close to, this is in the Bhind district. And right from here, you start seeing the cocktail of styles. And this is why I brought this. This is the palace of Mansingh. Notice these things here. Notice these here. And then see what has happened. These are low. So she remember, she had also traveled around Bengal and had her wakils and other people. So she uses all this and builds this complete stone structure. It's a beautiful monument. It's a small thing, but very, very beautiful. But this cocktail, this amalgamation of style continues all through, right down to her last structure. Because this was the first structure, and they were still experimenting, they hadn't found a way of accommodating staircases. And also they probably had wanted to buttress it. So this thing is added at the back. It has 2 small rooms on the lower floor used for cooking and storage of paraphernalia. And there is a, oh God. And there is a staircase which takes you up here to the first floor. And then there's further staircases which takes you up further up. This is very ornate, very minutely carved, and has a lot of exquisite paintings. The most significant architectural element that I found in Alampur Chhatri were these eaves. I haven't found such large eaves anywhere else. They're almost 2 meters long. And how they have balanced without too much is an architectural marvel. And with this, she also brought in what was popular in Maratha architecture then. This is called the Suruse Kham. There's a whole thesis by Sohoni on how this, but that's a different matter. So you see how things are just amalgamating, adding up. And just give you an idea of, these are 2 photographs of those eaves. Look at the amount of carvings on that. they're sandstone slabs. And each slab is about 5-inch thick. So how they took it up, managed to hold it, I would like to be the fly on the wall when they were building it. And it is painted. So you can see these paintings here, they come from these sections. This comes from here. This comes from this section. This is too damaged. In 1784, she built 3 chhatris. Chhatris are also cenotaphs. They don't have to be built where a person died because they are memorials. They can be built anywhere. So she built 3 chhatris in Indore, which she was, which by that time she had made the headquarters of a revenue section, and she's therefore called the mother of Indore. When you go to Indore, you'll find every important institute of Indore called Devi Ahilyabai something. So you have the Devi Ahilyabai Airport, you have the Devi Ahilyabai University, the Ahilya Ashram, the school where my grandmother was trained before she became a teacher, which still is a school, and many, many more structures. So this is the Indore Chhatri of Malwa Holkar. These are the 2 different views. And you can see that here again, there is a mix of styles, but by now, her architecture is much more refined. It's not that thick, it's delicate, and the carvings are also delicate. And here she starts experimenting with different colored stones, which you find in most of her important structure. These are red sandstones, this is yellow sandstone. And then this is brickwork, which is painted, it's not stone. This, of course, is stone, yellow sandstone. And this is the local stone, which is not very powerful. So because she used different colored stones, she did not need to put too much painting or plaster work around here. They just look beautiful today as they looked when she built them in 1780s. Now compare this structure with this one. Okay, before. This is a close-up of the say dome. Look at the dome. And why? Because we'll look at this dome later again to see how it's different. And this, the Suraj, but in Alampur they were plain. Here now they have a lot more carvings. Now compare that Chhatri to this Chhatri. They are all in a line. So, but how different can they be? There, the central Garbhagruha, which is always below the canopy of the mandapas, by the way, don't come out. The central Garbhagruha is under the chhatra, the canopy of the mandapa. This is 10-sided, and that one was just 4-sided and narrower. So again, the shape of the dome is different, and the eave here is much bigger and not as scalloped with a Bangla eaves, the way you find in Malwa Chhatri. The Chhatri in the middle of these 2 Chhatris is Khande Rao Chhatri. And look how simple that is. This was the place where she put her own image, and she probably made it very simple because she thought she didn't deserve it. And why do I say that? Because look at these 2 photographs. This is the photograph of Khande Rao and Ahilyabai's 2 co-wives and one of his Zanana women, major important Zanana women, and these are the other Zanana women. who committed sati with him. So she doesn't place her own image there. She doesn't put her image in the Garbhagruha at the back under the canopy the way these images are. She puts her image in a small niche. The day I took this photograph, I really laughed when I saw this red colored sari. Because this apparently was a gift by someone who visited the Chhatri. And I'm sure Ahilyabai, who always wore white, would have frowned on it. But the person who had a lot of faith in her had given it, so that's fine. Who am I to say anything? So look at the three different domes. On the right-hand corner is the dome of Malhara, Chhatri Indore. That dome, which is more sort of an onion-shaped dome, elongated, is the dome of Malera of Chhatri in Indore. And that is one of the domes of the Malhara of Chhatri in Alampur. Look how they're not the same. This is what I meant when I said there is no particular Ahilyabai style as such. This brings us to her last structure, the Phanse Ghat. This ghat and the two Chhatris at the back are dedicated to her son and daughter-in-law. What had happened is Muktabai's son, Natha, whom Ahilyabai was training to become her successor, died suddenly in 1793. And within a year, because he was the only son, a heartbroken Muktabai, Yashwant Rao, Ahilyabai's son-in-law, died. And Muktabai followed him on the funeral pyre without paying any heed to her mother's requests. But she created a problem for Ahilyabai. What she did, she had done something during her lifetime, which was again very unusual, like mother, like daughter, I guess. She had adopted a foundling from the banks of the Narmada. In the 18th century, when caste was so important, when nobody accepted anyone without knowing the caste, fostering a child was one thing, but she adopted it. And not only did she do that, as a last wish, she requested Ahilyabai that her properties, this son, I haven't found the name for this son, inherit her properties, which obviously put Ahilyabai in a fix. Because convention was, if someone died without an heir, another child from the same family was adopted and given the same privileges. If Ahilyabai had followed Muktabai's request incompletely, that would have created a social schism and a lot of problems. So Ahilyabai, ever the diplomat, found a solution. She gave the properties that she herself had given to Muktabai and which were there for her Stridhan. Now, Stridhan is an interesting concept in India. Stridham is the jewelry and whatever gifts a woman receives from her family members, including parents, husband, etc., etc. And she has the right to dispose of her Stridham the way she wants. So usually, a woman's Stridham is inherited by her daughters or daughters-in-law. But Ahilyabai took, under the guise that Muktabai's Stridhan, gave the Stridhan to the foundling and gave the rest of the money to Yashwant Rao, to another Phanse child who was officially adopted as a continuation of Phanse of the line. And she built this complex. This complex, it was almost as if she was surviving just for this complex to be completed. Because this complex was completed in February 1795, and Ahilyabai died in May 1795. That's it. She didn't survive much after its completion because Muktabai had been her last living relationship. Every other relationship of hers had died, preceded her. Her brothers, her brother-in-laws, her brother's son, of course, her son, her husband. So she was heartbroken. So before I go further, look at these small cubicles. These are important because they tell us that even in her grief, Ahilyabai was still thinking of her population. Today, 250 years later, pilgrims use these cubicles to change after a bathing or to spend the night, especially the pilgrims on the Narmada Parikrama. Remember, those who are doing a circumambulation of Narmada have to keep Narmada waters in their sight till they finish it. So making such small cubicles available to them was a boon. These are the two chhatris of Fansegat. This is the Yashwantrao chhatri is comparatively unadorned and of course in much more state of disrepair. But look at this amazing little gem of a building. John Malcolm, who must have visited it in its glory because she completed in 1795, he must have visited it around 1820s, has described this as the jewel and the best example of a mother's love. Another thing, unlike all other Ahilyabai structures, this one has statuary. And the statuary is also very important. It's as if Ahilyabai wanted to remember her daughter as a live and happy person and not a somber one. Look at this. Now, this is the first time we saw that here is a Frenchman, and let us say his friend for any other word. But what's remarkable is the smiles. This is the first time, again, this is an Ahilyabai invention. Other than this and the Holkar structures that follow, I've never seen smiling faces on Indian structures. They always sort of semi-smile of a Buddha or no smile, but never really good smile. And definitely nothing like this one. Look at this woman. I sometimes wonder if this was supposed to be a sort of an image of Muktabai. This is a hunter. And from her jewelry, we know that she came from the upper echelons of the society. And she's very proud of the fact that she has killed this little animal here. And she's smiling. And not just smiling, she's a very broad smile, showing her teeth. Look, you can see her teeth. Show me another statue in entire Indian art history that shows such joy. Let us now move over to other things, like the temples that she built. Do you know what this is? This is the Vishnupad of Gaya. This is by far the largest temple that she built. And this is Ahilyabai's temple at Somnath. This was the first temple to build at Somnath after Ghazni had ransacked the old Somnath temple and destroyed it. And this is her temple at Varanasi, the temple that I told you where she requested and got help from the East India Company to ensure free, easy and proper consecration. There is one of her own images that she has put somewhere in the corner here, in this particular, there's a little cubicle here, which the modern pandas have covered with brass plates and tell everyone that this is Parvati. So you better put some money here. And pilgrims who don't know better offer the money. I got into trouble there once. I was discussing with some senior archaeologist about this being Ahilyabai's image. And the Panda there almost threw me out. He was so livid because if that word got out, all the money he got as a chadhawa to that image would have stopped. After Ahilyabai's husband died, because when Khanderao died, he was supposedly working for the Mughal emperor and had put a siege around Surajmal Dat's fort at Kumbheri. So as a sort of a reparation, what is called as a Soli Bangri, the Mughal Badshah gave the revenue district of Verul, including the Verul village and the Ambad village near Jalna, to Ahilyabai and Ahilyabai's son. So this was one property that was exclusively Ahilyabai's, which she didn't get from anyone. And so she did a fair amount of constructions here. She rebuilt the Krishneshwar temple, which we are going to see in a minute. She renovated an old tank there, which is called the Shivalaya Tirtha. She fortified the Verul town. And very, very important, she did the conservation work of Kailash temple. What do we mean by conservation temple? Let's look a little. We'll cover that in a minute. This is the Krishneshwar temple, which she built. This particular temple existed from much earlier, and the plan she used was the same. She didn't change it. But we know it was different because of the domes above the mandapa. Instead of the rotated square roof, there's a domed roof. And even more interesting is the sort of images that we will have a look at in a second on the shikhara. The shikhara is a brick and mortar shikhara, and it was not built by Maharashtrians. It was probably built by artisans from Rajasthan. How was that concluded? Give me a second and we will go back to the slideshow. Okay, here it is. You can see it better now. Before that, many people claim that disagree that Ahilyabai rebuilt the temple and think on the basis of this, on the basis of this inscription slab, which is built into in a corner of the boundary walls, Yekoji Bhosla. So they think that Yekoji Bhosle built, who probably was an uncle of Shivaji, rebuilt this temple, because there's some mention somewhere of Maloji Bhosle, who was the local Patil. There's a ruined Bhosle Gadi nearby still, renovated the temple. But then Jirunodhar. But then Jirunodhar means anything that you want. It could mean rebuilding a temple, or it could just mean repairing some part of the temple. And I'm sure nobody's stupid enough. Those were very, very uncertain times. They needed to, the Bhosles were trying to build their profile. They needed an army. Why would anyone spend a lot of money to build a temple when your very survival was at stake? So that is something that I don't disagree with. I said this was built by Rajasthan because such, see this woman's image? She's wearing a ghagra. No woman, even today, in that part of Maharashtra, wears a ghagra. It's a 9-yard sari. So if obviously the artisans who made this image, or made a woman's image, made it with the sort of woman that they knew and what she wore, which was a ghagra. And that would mean that it only came from Rajasthan. And this temple is very interesting because it has very unusual images on that. You will find images on the Shikhara of Bhim, Nakul, Sahadev. Never seen anywhere else, but probably happened because this was the first temple to be built in around that area, or even in large temple in Maharashtra, since the fall of the Devgiri Yadavs. She renovated this tank, and no one can doubt her authorship because of this inscription that this tank has. And don't go by the filthy water in this that you see here. I remember as a child bathing in the crystal clear waters of this tank because I was assured of its curative properties. It is modern plastic, and our modern habit of throwing anything and everything and food leftovers into the water, which has destroyed it. I mentioned that she renovated Kailash. Now look at this. These three images, the one on the left and the top two images, are from inside Kailash. And these are original images. Look at the lines, the curvature, the certainty with which it is going. Look at the motion. Look at these details. And look at the almost crude painting here. And a very thick plaster. This plaster is not very thick. So, again. So, obviously, it is very clear that these three and these two are from different periods. So, which period? Here, these two images, this lady and this wall, are photographs of paintings on Ahilyabai. Now compare the lines here, the way it is, and the colors. The colors here and the colors here, and you will realize this probably were the same sort of artists, or at least artists trained in the same school or the same time. So it has to be that this renovation and the exterior painting and plastering was done during Ahilyabai's time. This is an image of the Manakarnika Ghat in Banaras, which is one of the ghats that Ahilyabai built. And this is the first time that I actually, when I waded into Ganga here, that I found these images and have recorded them. These are Ahilyabai's old images. We saw this one earlier. Ahilyabai also built other ghats here. The current ghat, where they have this big arti ceremony in the at dusk, happens at the ghat that she built, and there's a big wada of hers at the back. There are many other small travelers' inns along the parikrama, but I'm not going to go through all this because of paucity of time. And these are the ghats. I've been talking about the ghats, and these are the two ghats of Maheshwar, besides the one that you saw before. And again, this is, of course, the Phanse Ghat. And this is the Kashi Vishwanath Ghat, or the Pani Ghat, which he built in late 1780s. Notice the cubicles here. There are cubicles on along that wall also. This here is the dam that Ahilyabai built, called the Dam and Baradari, outside Maheshwar. And this dam was built at Jamghat. Remember I told you about the Bheels? This was built in the Bheel area. She also built a huge big gateway there for travelers to pay their toll, which probably the Bheels had a small portion of. Now, these two structures, this little thing called Ramkund and this is a Baudi nearby, they were sort of connected to each other. Even today in rainy season, you find water from the tank going into this. And here you find things for moats and stuff for the water to be used for irrigation purposes. I can never understand why we Indians completely neglect these old water structures. If we just desilt and repair them, we will not have the need for many of the big dams that we built. But this country is dotted with such tanks. If you travel around Rameshwaram, a district which is very thirsty, you find there are tanks which nobody is using. Or the huge big tank outside Bijapur, which once provided water to Bijapur. I think someone like Khaki should start a movement for us to do something about it. And all of you must be wondering why I haven't touched upon this, the iconic Ahilya Ghat of Maheshwar. I didn't talk about it because it was not built by Ahilyabai. It is a complex built in her memory, which has these arcades outside, and it has this Ahilya Chhatri inside, and a Chhatri to Yashwantrao Holkar's young brother. So that is, I can actually continue talking about Ahilyabai forever because there's so much more to it, but maybe some other time. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you. This was brilliant, and I think everyone's enthralled, and there's a whole list of questions that we have from the audience. So let me sort of start asking you some of them. I think we started initially with your mention of Anarkali, and Chetan had asked that he had heard that there was a tomb of Anarkali in Lahore. Is that true, and what is that?
Well, there is a tomb, but whose tomb it is, we don't know. There's no mention. And it is just assumed that it is Anarkali's tomb.
Okay. There's a question as to what is a Jagir. I think that you made it amply clear in your talks. People have understood what Jagir really is. And you also explained, Namrata Roy had asked, based on your points, why the word royalty is used to describe the Holkars. I think you
this word has come into use later from post 1830s. When every single Jagirdar started calling themselves Raja or Raja. So this was not something that they used at the time of Ahilyabai or Malhara Holkar or even Tukojirao Holkar, who survived for a few years, or even in the initial years of Yashwantrao Holkar. It was only after he defeated Warren Hastings in one of the battles, he sort of crowned himself a Maharaja and then went on to claim a feudatory status of the Afghanistan Nawab. What the hell?
So till then, if you can take a question of my friend Ronak, what is the language spoken by her and in her region? Was it really? If so, even though the central provinces had Maratha Sardars like Holkar, Shinde, Pawar, How did Hindi become the primary language now?
Well, Hindi was the local language, but the court language was always Marathi. You have Marathi Modi as the official language, and the language used for corresponding with, say, the British or other rulers was Farsi. And Ahilyabai and even later Holkars always seem to make a special effort of bridging the gap. At Ahilya Ghat, you will find many images of Krishna with two gopis. One of the gopis is always in a Maharashtrian 9-yard sari, and the other in a ghagra.
Okay.
And there's something else that Ahilyabai did, which I should have mentioned, but I missed when I was talking about Krishneshwar. Remember, this was a time when the sectarian enmity between the Shaivas and Vaishnavas were at the peak. At Chidambaram, for example, just because someone painted a Vaishnav symbol on the boundary walls of the Chidambaram temple, some Brahmins committed suicide. And in this atmosphere comes Ahilyabai. And in her temples, you find Shiva temples. Remember, she renovated all the 12 Jyotirlingas. In the Shiva temples, they have a lot of Vaishnava images. In Krishneshwar, because I noticed this, I sat down and analyzed. And there are 75% Vaishnava images and only 25% Shaiva images. And even in Ahilya Chhatri, her descendants have continued the whole thing. And the main aisle of the Chhatri, the central aisle, has the Dashavtar images. The Dashavtar images are also on the gate to the doorway to the Garbhagruha. And Shiva images are restricted to the periphery, external periphery of the temple. So this I find very fascinating, to have this sort of a broad view. And I feel it is very important that in today's India, we remember this and stop feuding about various spiritual things.
What to Sukhi?
Yeah, sorry about that. Did she face any problems from other rulers because she was a woman?
Did she face what? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Problems from other administrators because she was a woman. This was not a time that was conducive for
her moral stature was such. In fact, this was a question. This was something that was pointed out to Malcolm when he wondered why was she spending so much money on all these endowments rather than having army or something. And the Brahmins and others pointed out to him that who dare attack her with this sort of a moral stature. Except there was one exception in the entire rule. And this was in Rampuram, because this was a little a part of a Jagir on the borders of which sort of between Malwa and Rajputana. And it was under dispute. So the illegitimate son of those people, they came and occupied it. But when her negotiations failed, she sent an army and took it back. But that was one and only case in the 30-year rule. Absolutely nothing besides that.
Okay. There's a lot of compliments for the quality of the historical information. And of course, there's also a comment that this material needs to be a part of a public administration course so people can understand and appreciate this work. Shishir has also mentioned that you can find your book on Amazon. So if at the end you could just tell us.
It's not on Amazon, unfortunately.
Okay.
Amazon takes 35% of the cost. So anyone who wants can go to the KR Kama Oriental Institute website. Or alternately, what I can do is people can write to me or write to you and I will send them the link. And currently there is a 20% off.
Okay.
So, but my book is not on Ahilyabai, it is on the architecture and documentation of the architecture of Maheshwar. Because I am currently trying to document all her structures across the country.
Lovely. Lovely. And there is a question as to how come the Holkar Palace is called in Chandwad is called Rang Mahal. Is that built by her or someone else?
No, it was probably at the initial stages, it was built by Malhara Holkar, because he bought that Deshmukhi for 25,000 rupees.
Okay.
And then because Tukojira was always stationed there, even during Malhara's rule, he was stationed there. Because remember, that is an important pass. So anyone who wants to cross into the north from Maharashtra has to go through Chandwad. So if you want to stop someone coming in, that's the place to be.
Okay.
And it is called Rang Mahal because it has a dalan, which is very colorful and beautifully painted. And there's nothing erotic in those paintings. They're all painted, religious painting. People think when they say Rang Mahal, people think they're erotic paintings. I said, no, it's not. It's Rang Mahal because it's colorful.
Oh, okay. There's also a question of a difference between Samadhi and Chhatri. I think you sort of took us through that as well.
I'm sorry, I wish I had put in, I thought about it, then missed it. I wanted to put a couple of photographs of Samadhis to show the difference. A Samadhi has just a sort of a platform and a small receptacle for a tulsi plant, whereas a Chhatri has a Shivalinga on the floor, and at the back of the Chhatri, the Garbhagriha of the Chhatri, is a small platform with a canopy under which the people whose memory the Chhatri is, their images are put. And this little Garbhagriha is covered entirely, it sits under the canopy of the mandapa. You see, mandapas usually come out and are attached to the Garbhagriha. But in Chhatris at the time of Ahilyabai, they just were covered by canopy the way you find in many Rajasthani Chhatris. However, later on, by the time you come to Ahilyabai Chhatri, the canopy had disappeared and it became almost like a temple.
Ronak Ramteke has asked what was the language spoken by her and the region.
We took that question.
All right. Okay, I missed that then. Also, there is a question, what is it a right conclusion that Ahilyabai brought prosperity to Malwa by boosting trade, which of course you started by saying. Did she also contribute so much to the development of architecture in the region per se?
I don't think so. She really contributed to the architecture because most of her architecture is not very big. There are not these huge monumental structures, except maybe the Vishnu Park temple. There are smaller structures, but the important thing was these are public. Most of the architecture is public utilities architecture. There are smaller temples where people needed it, or she renovated temples. She built travelers' inns. And because of paucity of time, I couldn't cover the entire gamut of her things, photographs. But she built it in, and she built, as I said, tanks, ghats, wells, etc.
And Commander Mohan Narayan has asked whether you could elaborate on her encouragement of Maheshwar textiles.
Encouragement of?
Maheshwar textiles.
Well, she actually worked, she invited those master weavers and worked with them to create the fabric. And even during her lifetime, Maheshwari fabric had become so popular that we have records of the Peshwas ordering Maheshwari fabrics from there, or buying a lot of Maheshwari fabric for which they paid later. And what was very interesting about this also highlights a little thing about her financial acumen. The Peshwas, when they ordered Maheshwari they ordered their ambassador in Maheshwar to send the dhotis. And so the the Peshwa ambassador asked Ahilyabai for money to pay for that. And she says, what the hell? Nobody asked me. If you are there ordering you and you say, no, you pay the money. I'm not going to pay. And how do you know? And how much are you paying? You're paying too much. Even though that she accepted them as the rulers, she refused to pay for something that she hadn't ordered and which they didn't request. She said, if you send it, it becomes like you're sending it. Why should I pay? I'm not going to pay.
Okay. So other than the imagery that you've shown, is there any other original painting of Ahilyabai Holkar anywhere?
Ahilyabai, a painting of Ahilyabai herself?
Yeah.
No. There are some, at least not that. There is one, but I don't know what the date of its date. There's one Ahilyabai painting, probably of the 18th century in Sandwad. But I suspect it's more late 19th century than 18th century. I mean, there is a painting there. And some Maratha painting, style painting, but the time seems to be a bit.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of connection that people have shown about their own sort of linkage with Indore. Srivardhan has talked about it, and you know, some Tejaswini has asked if there are any records related to the construction expenses. Did you come across accounts and so on?
Instructions of?
Any construction expenses? Did you come across accounts?
Some yes.
Okay.
Some yes. Not too many. Not too many. Unfortunately, what has happened is the Holkar archives, which we know existed till 1940s because some of the excerpts were printed. So pre-1901 Holkar archives have disappeared from the face of the earth. I've been hunting across the length and breadth of Madhya Pradesh to find them. So they were given from the Indore state to the Madhya Bharat state. Even the 1901 archives, when I traced them to Bhopal, were housed in a building which is written off. I went there during rainy season. The building was leaking. It was full of mosquitoes. There was water on the floor. And the electricity department had cut off its electricity. But the wonderful archive, state archive section had not found it necessary to move them. I've been trying to tell everyone, please do that. We have lost a lot. Please don't lose. I don't know.
That's such a travesty, really. Commander Mohan Narayan had another question, whether on your map of the temples that Ahilyabai had built,
temples, there are structures.
So structures.
Hearts, travelers' inns, etc.
He says that Puri is reflected in Western India, and does that mean the modern Elephant Island?
Sorry, Puri. Are you asking about Puri?
Yeah.
Well, there is a mention of her temple in Puri, but I still haven't been to Orissa to search for it.
Okay.
So I cannot, because what happens is some of these temples have disappeared. I had half a mind to put a photograph of the concrete monstrosity that was built in Miri near Ahmednagar, which replaced her structure. And I went to the local zamindar, I went to the Patil, I said, can you at least show me some photograph of this temple before you pulled it down? But they haven't done any records of it.
Oh, again, such a pity. Interesting comment from Rama Bishnoi, who says that on a visit to Maheshwar with Shalini Holkar, they were told that all the Safa requirements of the Maratha army were only made by Maheshwari cotton. So I guess that's a great legacy.
Not that I know of.
No, is it? Okay. Okay.
Because at least the published accounts that I have read don't indicate. They very clearly state being paid in money.
But made of Maheshwari cotton. I think her comment is that they sourced the cotton from Maheshwar and made it.
Maybe, because the Maheshwar cotton was famous. But then the Maheshwari fabric was not cotton. It was a special mix, a blend of silk and cotton. And the so-called Maheshwari saris that you get in Maheshwar today are not the original Maheshwari saris. And the weavers most of the weavers who are doing that have come from Nagpur. So they don't have the traditional thing also. Really want something close to the original Maheshwari sari. do go to the women's weave in Maheshwar, but I think they have also stopped making them. I probably managed to buy the last Garbha Reshmi sari from them. And it has a special luster, believe me.
Amazing, amazing. So thank you very much, and enjoy your Saturday evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Johar, and I would invite everyone to come and join us for our workshops and talks tomorrow and after. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.